Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Ball Profits. My name is Rob Scooter. Thanks for joining me tonight. This is our start sit video for week 12. And as you can probably see in the bottom of the video, this is a little bit longer video, but here's why. One, it's crunch time for many of you. You need to make the playoffs weeks 12 and 13, and so you're really struggling with needing to get some wins. We want to give you the best information possible. There's not bye weeks. That means we cover every game in the NFL. We cover almost every player that you might be considering starting or sitting, and we just want to get you as much information as possible. So it's a little bit longer, but we think that we'll give you better information you'll find on any other site. Before we go any further, I want to say thank you to all of you that have subscribed, watched our videos. This is our first year doing this. My son and I started this fall, and we're excited to grow the site. And we're going to do that through you guys, through your subscriptions. Hit the notification button so you can get new videos. Even in the off season, we're going to run videos. But we really want to continue to build the site based on the information that you give us, what you want to see, what we can do that's more helpful to you guys. We want to give you good information. And one of the things we really want to do is we want to stay away from feelings and hunches on here. We really try to stick to numbers, trends, player information, statistics, those sort of things. So this is our Week 12 start sit video, and we want to give you some food for thought. Now, one thing that we always say on these videos is I don't understand your league, I don't understand your rules, your scoring, things like that. So I can't take this information and put in the context of your site. You need to do that. Take this information, put in the context of your league. Now, what we do try to do is offer as much information as we can to you guys. In the bottom of our videos, a lot of you will ask questions specific to your league, and we'll do the best we can to break down those questions. The one thing I would ask for you is if you have a start sit video question, put at the bottom, and we will get back to you, and we'll try to give a nice deep answer as to why we feel you should start a certain guy or sit a certain guy. But try not to leave those last second on Sunday mornings. I work Sunday mornings, and I have a window where I can't get to my computer between about 9 to 12 on Sunday morning. So if you want us to answer those questions, try to get it in before that. So let's get going. Week 12 starts the video. Let's look at the first game this week. Vikings versus the Lions. I want to give a shout out to my Vikings again. They beat the Rams. Love it. Pretty excited. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about this game going on the road. Thanksgiving in Detroit. It's going to be a rough game. Now let's take a look at the quarterbacks here. Let's look at Case Keenum. Is he a guy that you want to start or sit this week? Well, Detroit gives up the 12th fewest points to quarterbacks. But if you take a look at, they're actually more vulnerable to the pass than maybe those numbers would indicate. They actually cushion those statistics in the last 3 weeks against quarterbacks like Trubinsky, Hundley, and Kaiser. So they look pretty good against the pass. And Detroit's defense is solid, but I think they kind of sit in the middle of the road in terms of points allowed to quarterbacks. But when I take a look at the Vikings, I look at Case Keenum, I still think the strength of this team is built on defense, running the ball. This is a team that kind of wins old school. And now you look at Case, he does have some good weapons around him. He's got Thielen, Diggs, and McKinnon are good weapons. And so I would say he's a guy that you could start, but he kind of falls in the quarterback range of about 12 to 18 as far as where he is at. So Case Keenum is not a bad option for you. He's played well. He's been consistent. He's certainly been a nice surprise for us Vikings fans. But I'm not sure he's a huge fantasy option, somebody that I'd want to rely on unless you're in a deeper league or you're really desperate with injuries or you have to start two quarterbacks. Let's get that right there. So what about Matthew Stafford? Well, Matthew Stafford's averaged over 20 points in fantasy the last 5 games. During that stretch, he's averaged 325 passing yards, and for the year, he's got 19 touchdown passes and only 5 interceptions. So he's playing real well right now. He's playing very solid football and putting up decent fantasy numbers. Now he plays Minnesota, who gives up the 11th fewest points to quarterbacks. So would I start or sit Matthew Stafford? Well, I would start him. He's playing at home. He's playing well and consistent. Now, this is not a great matchup for him, but here's the thing that I have to ask most of you out there. If you don't start Matthew Stafford, who are you going to start? I highly doubt that you have another guy on your bench that's better than him. If you got Matthew Stafford and Tom Brady, then we don't need to have this conversation. You start Tom Brady. But most likely, if you have Stafford, your second guy or the guy that's out there is probably not going to be as good as he is. So I would be comfortable starting him against the Vikings. I think he'll be decent. I don't think he's going to be a great play this week, but he's a guy that you could trust who's fairly safe. He sits in a range about 10 to 14 in the quarterback range. Let's look at the Vikings quarterbacks. Or the running backs. The Vikings give up the second fewest points to running backs. So let's look at Theo Riddick and Amar Abdullah. Theo Riddick has had a little bit of value in PPR leagues, although he's dropped off this year. He's not somebody that's put up enough consistent production that you can trust, so I would stay away from Theo Riddick. And then Amir Abdullah. Well, he's got 3 TDs on the year. And if you look at the Vikings, once again, they're tough to running backs. Now, he has struggled a bit, Amir, but his best game this year is against the Vikings early in the year. I still have my concerns with Amir. I don't know why he had his best game against the Vikes. Once again, the Vikes are tough against the run. They give the second fewest points to running backs. If you look at the 3 of his last 4 games, Amir's yards per carry were 2, 2.3, and 2.5. So I would say that right now he kind of sits in what I would call that running back 3 category, simply by the fact that you can't totally eliminate him in the conversation of starting running backs. He is their starting back there. He will get it carries, probably double-digit carries. 12 to 15 is really within reason. but he hasn't been that effective. He has a tough matchup, so he would fall back into that maybe running back 3 conversation if you need somebody. What about the Vikings running backs? Well, you got Jerick McKinnon. Well, 6 games in a row, he's had double-digit carries. Plus, he's great in the passing game, and for the year, he's got 35 receptions. And that considered early in the year when Dalvin Cook was there, and he was getting a lot of the receptions. So his numbers would probably be close to 45 if he played all year in that role. He is losing the goal line carries to Murray, and so that lowers his value. If you look at McKinnon, I would say he sits about a running back 3. You could bump him up to running back 2 in PPR leagues. He does have huge value there. Once again, the downside is he loses a lot of carries to Murray. Now, what about Latavius Murray? He's a guy that you could start. He's really starting to hit his stride. He's got 4 TDs in the last 4 games. Last 6 games, he's had double-digit carries, and his yards per carry have been over 4.3 in the last 4 games. So early in the year, you can get a lot of. He struggled early coming out of camp, out of the preseason. He was injured, he had a lot of playing time. But as the years gone on, he's getting stronger. So he's another guy that I would say, because of what he's done, he falls into that running back 2 to 3 category. He's a better start in standards league than he is in PPR leagues. He doesn't catch as much balls out of the backfield. What about wideouts here? I'll look at Golden Tate. He finally had a letdown game. He'd been very consistent. It happens. I don't care how good you are. Even the best wide receivers have letdown games. But he's still the #1 wide out there. Now, if you look at Vikings, they're middle of the pack in terms of points allowed to wide receivers. And if you look at last year when Golden Tate played the Vikings, kind of look at, and basically the Vikings defense is really pretty much the same defense as last year. You look at Rose and the players that they have there. Last year, Golden Tate against them had 2 really good games. So I would say you need to start Golden Tate this week as a wide receiver too. What about Marvin Jones? Well, Marvin Jones, for the last 5 games, has been really good. Now, the Vikings, once again, are tough, but I think he's a must-start, at least until we can see Marvin Jones consistently slow down. In the meantime, as long as you put up the number, I think you need to continue to play Marvin Jones. What about Galladay? Galladay there. Well, he showed some promise. I think he's a guy that going into next year has a ton of potential, but he just doesn't have enough volume as a guy that you can trust, so I would stay away from him. Now let's look at the Vikings wide receiver, Stephon Diggs. Well, Stephon Diggs going this year was the #1 wideout for the Vikings. Got a ton of talent. When he's healthy and he plays, he's got the type of skills that can move into that conversation of a top 10 to 15 wideout. But he's no longer the Vikings' #1 guy. He's really fell down to the Vikings' #2 wideout at this point. Plays the Lions to give the 14th fewest points to wide receivers. Now, if you look at the last 3 games, he's had 4 catches. But Case Keenum prefers to use Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen has been a real revelation for the Vikings. For a lot of you fantasy owners out there, what a great steal he's been. Diggs still has a lot of skills, and he's too good to sit at this point. So here's what I would say. Stephon Diggs falls into your wide receiver 3 category this week. As far as Adam Thielen goes, he is on pace for 1,450 yards. Right now in the league, he's only second to Antonio Brown as far as average yards per game. Adam Thielen is a wide receiver 1. He is lights out right now. For all you guys that got him out there, you're loving him. In fact, a lot of you, he's helped you put yourself in a good position to make the playoffs at this point. You need to start him. As far as tight ends go, you look at Kyle Rudolph in this game. 6 games in a row, he's had over 5 catches per game. But if you look, his yards aren't very high this year. In fact, his most yards he's had were 58, and that was last week. He does have 3 TDs on the year, so he's a low-end tight end start. He's no longer considered a top 10 start. He is playing the Lions to give the 15 fewest points to tight ends. He's a fair play, but not a great play this week, Kyle Rudolph. As far as Eric Ebron goes, he's played a lot better in the last 5 games, starting to figure some things out, being more consistent. But right now, the Vikings are great against tight ends, so I would sit Eric Ebron. I wouldn't even consider him. As far as kickers go, I would start Prater and Kyle Forbath. They're both good. I would sit the Vikings defense, and this is hard for me to say as a Vikings fan, but here's why I do it. They're having a great year on defense, but sometimes, and we said this in one of our preseason videos, not every good football defense turns out to be a good fantasy football defense, and that's the case right now for the Vikings. They're playing really good defense, but it hasn't equated to good fantasy numbers. Then if you look at Matthew Stafford, he's cut down his turnovers, are playing at home. All those things would lead me to believe you need to stay away from the Vikings defense. I would also sit the Lions defense because Case hasn't allowed a lot of points to opposing defenses, so that's kind of my take on that game. What about the Chargers and the Cowboys? Well, let's take a look at Dak Prescott. Well, the absence of all-pro offensive lineman Smith and Zeke being out has really hurting him. If you take a look at 3 of his last 4 games, he has struggled greatly. In fact, he's had a quarterback rating at 3 of those 4 games of 82.1, 82.2, and a woeful 30.4 last game. Now, he should rebound a bit against the Chargers. Obviously, he's not going to get worse than what he did last game. But if you look at the Chargers, it's actually tough against the pass. If you look at Ingram and Bosa, they like to bring a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and they'll allow 10th fewest points to quarterbacks. And so here's what I think is going to happen in that game. Dallas thinks going to make a real effort to run the ball to take pressure off the Chargers' pass rush, especially with Smith being out, offensive tackle Smith. Another thing that's a concern for me is Dez Bryant. Just not the Dez Bryant that we've seen years before. We don't know what's going on there. I don't know what's chemistry between him as he lost a step. We're not really sure. You look at Witten, who's at the end of his career, not the tight end he once was. So with no Zeke Smith, here's what I would say with Dak Prescott. Some of you are going to need to start him out there. He's too good not to, but I need to caution him. He's no longer, this week, he's not top 5, not 10. He sits in a quarterback range of about 10 to 13. Philip Rivers in this game, he's a safe play against Dallas. Dallas gives the 16 most points to quarterbacks. Philip Rivers has filled well the last 2 weeks. He's played well against some tough defense. He's played the Bills and the Jags of all teams. Jags are the best defense in the NFL right now. They're crazy good. He's averaging those two defenses that he played 225 yards and 2 TDs. So he's done pretty well. Now he gets a little bit of break playing the Dallas defense there. So he's a guy that you could start. As far as running backs go, well, the Chargers allow the fourth most points to running backs, and so Alfred Morris is a good start this week. He sits as what I would call a running back to start. He's looked good in relief of Ezekiel Elliott. In fact, he had 17 carries for 91 yards in one game, and that's 5.4 yards a carry. In the other game, he's 11 carries for 53 yards for 4.8 yards per carry. So he's actually looked pretty good in that role. So he's a guy, once again, Morris, I would start him as a running back too. All other Dallas backs I would sit at this point. I know there's been a lot of conversation about Rod Smith, but it hasn't really came into fruition there. McFadden hasn't done anything, so... what about Melvin Gordon? Well, he's their lead back, and so he's a must-start as a running back one. He hasn't been great this year, but he's been solid. Last game, we saw he had 20 carries for 80 yards. They're going to get him the rock. He's going to get carries. They're going to get touches. He's going to get looks in the passing game, so you need to start Melvin Gordon. Now, last game, he didn't get targeted in the passing game, but part of it is that they blew the Bills out of the water, and they got such a big lead. They were able to shift gears, and they started giving a lot of carries to Austin Eckler. He had another good week last week. Now, is he a guy that you could start? Well, they blew out Buffalo. That game was really done at halftime, and that allowed the Chargers to rest Gordon and give reps to Austin. You look at how he's playing the Cowboys, get up to 15th most points to running backs. Maybe I would start Austin as a flex or in deeper PPR leagues. Don't get too excited what happened last 2 weeks. Both of those were opportunities that just kind of present themselves. I don't see that being a blowout again. And in a close game, they're going to rely on Gordon when they need to. As far as wideouts go in this game, let's look at Keenan Allen of the Chargers. We told a lot of people he's still number one wideout. We know he kind of had a fall off statistically, but we still said he's the number one guy there, and so don't give up on him. You still need to start this guy. I hope you listened to that advice, because if you did, as you know, he blew up last week. He had 12 catches, 159 yards, and 2 TDs. Now it faces the Cowboys, who give the 7th most points to wideouts. So you definitely need to start him. All other wideouts for San Diego, I would sit. They'll look at the 2 Williams, and you look at Benjamin. Neither one of those guys is really reliable at this point. Right now, your best bet is probably Williams. The rookie Mike Williams is really starting to come on a little bit. Last game, he had 5 catches, 38 yards. That's the career high for him in his short career that he has had, but still not enough to trust in him. You look at Dez Bryant. Dez Bryant is still Dez Bryant, even though he's struggled. You need to start him. He's not a wide receiver 1. He has been in that conversation for quite a while, but he's a wide receiver 2 in a game like this, so Dez Bryant's a guy that you could start. If you take a look at Williams and Beasley for Dallas, should you start them? Well, Beasley is really touchdown dependent. He's got 4 TDs on the year, 2 in 2 different games. But here's my concern. Beyond that, he's never had over 33 yards receiving in one game. And Williams had one really big game, but beyond that, that was really kind of an anomaly. Otherwise, he hasn't done a whole lot that you can trust. And so the only wideouts I would really trust there would be Allen and Dez Bryant. As far as tight ends go, the Chargers get the second fewest points at tight end. So the Chargers are really stingy against tight ends. Second fewest points allowed. You look at Witten, he's getting older, not the player he once was. The matchup would dictate that you need to sit Witten this week. Hunter Henry in this game. He's really disappointed, not fulfilled the early season promise a lot of people had. He's too talented to outright sit at this point, but he's not a top 10 tight end this weekend. You could start him if you have no other viable options. Antonio Gates, he's really not even the conversation. He's a Hall of Famer, a great tight end, but he shouldn't even be on your roster right now, so please don't have him and don't start him out there. As far as kickers go, they're both what I call moderate starts. Novak and Nugent are guys you could start. They're not going to be bust. They're not going to have big games, but they're moderate plays. I would sit the Cowboys defense, and I actually would start the Chargers this week. They really like to get after the quarterback. If you look at Dallas with all offensive linemen, Smith being out of the last 2 weeks, they've allowed 12 sacks. 12 sacks in 2 weeks. Now you're going to bring in Ingram and Bosa to that, and so that could be an ugly day for Dak Prescott. What about the Giants versus the Redskins? Well, let's look at Eli Manning. Washington gives up the 5th most points to quarterbacks. Now, when I look at this game, there should be a fair amount of points scored in this game. Kirk Cousins, I think, is going to put some points on the board. But if you take Eli Manning, the guy that you could start. Well, Eli Manning has really been bad this year, and he might be without Darkwa and Shepard. Shepard's questionable. He's having migraine issues all week long. He didn't practice today on Tuesday, and so there's just so many question marks at the point. If Shepard doesn't play, you're looking at really the only real reliable weapon is Evan Ingram there. If you take a look at Eli, his best game, if you look at since week 4, before he lost to Odell Beckham and Marshall, his best game since then was San Francisco in week 10. He had 275 yards and 2 TDs. And San Francisco has a terrible pass defense, and Eli barely salvaged that day as a last-second touchdown during garbage time where he kind of built up his yards. And so he really hasn't been very good. So for me, Eli's a scary play. I rank him closer to 20 this week, a guy that I'd shy away from. If you have nobody else, I suppose you could use him, but I'd like to find somebody else. Kirk Cousins plays the Giants, who give the 3rd most points to quarterbacks. This is a good start for him at home for Cousins. Now, he did lose Chris Thompson this week. He's going to be out for the year, broken fibula. But what they may get back is Jordan Reed. And so that might be the trade-off. They lose Chris Thompson to get Jordan Reed back. Some of those targets will go to the tight ends. And if you look at Cousins, he's averaging over 300 yards passing in the last 6 games. So that's really solid there. And with Samaje Perine running the ball, I think the hopes to win games really rest on Cousins' arm. I like Kirk Cousins in this game, so I think he's a good start. As far as running backs go, Wayne Gallman, there's really nothing more. He's a backup at this point, not even worth consideration. And then Orleans Darkwa. Orleans Darkwa plays Washington, who gives the 7th most points to running backs. If you look at Darkwa, the last 3 games, he's over 70 yards rushing during those. And he's a lead back. He has no competition, so he is the go-to guy there. You can trust that. He's been very effective on the year. His yards per carry have been 4.8. He'd actually have more yards than his total yards to say, but what's been happening here is he's running the ball well and effectively, but they're falling behind and they have to abandon the run to pass because the Giants are falling behind. Now, they have said that Darkwa is questionable right now. He's been limited at practice, but everything would seem to indicate that he's limited at practice, but he will play this week. He's a guy that I would definitely start. He's at kind of on your fringe running back 2 to 3 area there. Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine had struggled all year. In fact, even after that great game he had last week, he still has a yards per carry 3.2. But last week he blows up. He has 23 carries, 117 yards, and a touchdown. Now Thompson's out for the year, and Kelly's still out, and so he's the man there. And so is he somebody that you could start? Well, half the battle in fantasy football is getting opportunity and getting volume, and so in fact, he's the only running back they really have on that roster at this point. He's going to be their starter. He's going to get carries. He's going to get a majority. He's going to get volume. And so, therefore, he falls in that running back 2 to 3 conversation. But here's what I would tell you. I expect to let down his yards per carry. Probably going to get 20 carries in this game. I wouldn't be all that surprised if you see 20 carries for 65 yards, that type of game. Hopefully, he can get a touchdown and make it worth a start. If not, if you're really depending just on his yardage, don't expect much from him there. As far as wideouts go in this game, let's look at Sterling Shepard. I actually love this guy. I think he's a very talented second-year wideout. He's not just valuable because he's the #1 wideout for this team. I think he's a guy that's got a bright future in the league. Now, last game he missed the game with migraines, and he missed practice today. So here's what I would say. Watch the report. If he plays, I would definitely start him. I think he's their only real legit wideout they have there. Even though they have a rough matchup against Washington, I would still start him as a wide receiver 2 to 3. Like I said, watch the report on Thursday and see if he's going to suit up. In fact, it kind of burnt me last week. I started the guy because he was going to play. Sunday I got back from work, and he didn't play, so I got a 0 in his position. Turns out I ended up losing that game by 0.75 of a point, but it happens, right? As far as the other wide receivers for the Giants, I would sit them. As far as Washington wideouts, Jamison Crowder plays the Giants, who give the 15 most points to wideouts. So Jamison Crowder looks like he's figured it out. Now, the coaches promised about a month or so ago that they're going to try to get him more involved in the offense. They followed through with that. Here's the lines he's had the last 3 weeks that he's played. 9 catches, 123 yards, 4 catches, 76 yards, and 7 catches for 72 yards. So I would feel comfortable starting him. And then Josh Dotson. Former first-round pick is getting better and better. Last week he had a career-high 81 yards. He's a very talented wideout, and he sits as a wide receiver 3 to 4, depending upon the size of your league and the needs of your league and some of those other things that you need to factor in. But he's actually not a bad start at this point. He's moved up the depth chart, and he's really the #2 guy after Crowder. Grant's mixed in there a little bit too. As far as tight ends go in this league, well, the Giants give up the most points to tight ends. So the Giants are very vulnerable to tight ends. So here's what I would say. Jordan Reed's been out. He's been injured. Reports seem to indicate he's going to play this week. And if he plays, you need to start him. But I'd also say this. Vernon Davis has been very good. In fact, he's over 60 yards 5 of the last 6 games. So even if Reed plays, now typically what I would say is if Reed plays, don't play Davis. But in this game, I think they have enough volume, especially with Chris Thompson out. I think those targets will go to the tight ends, and both of these tight ends could be started and have enough production to go around for both tight ends in this game. As far as Evan Ingram goes, the Giants tight end, Washington gives with the 4th most points to tight-outs. Evan Ingram is very, very talented. He's got Travis Kelce, Gronkowski type of talent. Going into next year, he's going to be top 5 in the preseason rankings. This guy's got all talent in the world, and so you need to play him. He had TDs 4 weeks in a row now. It did get broke last week. He didn't score a touchdown, but I think part of that was Shepard out there. Defenses were able to focus on him, but you still need to start this guy. As far as kickers go here, I would say that both kickers are okay. Roses and Rose are okay starts. They're not great starts. So if you got to go that way, you can. They're not going to be bust, but they're not going to be great. I would sit both defenses in this one. The Falcons versus the Buccaneers. Let's look at Matt Ryan. Well, Matt Ryan seems to turn the corner here. It feels like it looks like he's figured it out. He's had 8 TD passes in the last 4 games with only 2 interceptions. Tampa Bay is vulnerable to the pass, so Ryan, you need to start him this week and feel okay with that. As far as Ryan Fitzpatrick, he plays Atlanta. Now, Atlanta gives up the 7th most points to quarterbacks. And if you look at Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's been good in relief of Winston. Last week, he had 275 yards, 2 TD, and a win. Tampa Bay cannot run the ball. Martin is stuck in the mud. And so I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is not a bad play if you have an injury that you need to fill in, or your quarterback plays the Jags this week, or if you're in a league that starts 2 quarterbacks. Ryan Fitzpatrick is actually not a bad play against Atlanta there. The veteran is okay. As far as running backs go, what about Tevin Coleman of Atlanta? 2 weeks in a row, he's had 20 carries. Now, last week, he did get a touchdown. His yard totals are very low. He's a guy that you could start. Well, here's what I would say. He's a running back, too, if Freeman is out. I would say if Freeman ends up playing in the game, because Freeman missed it, he was on concussion protocol, Coleman would fall then into what I'd say a running back 3 flex play in PPR leagues. If Devontae Freeman plays, and it sounds like he will, it sounds like he'll be back this week. If Devontae Freeman, once again, he's a running back 1, you need to play him. That's kind of a no-brainer there. As far as Doug Martin goes, he's really struggling this year. His yards per carry at 3.1. He's getting worse and worse. At this point, I think you need to probably sit him. The guy I wouldn't start, but a guy that you need to start keeping your eye on the next week or so is Jaquez Rodgers. Right now, he just looks like a better running back than Martin. Martin had a good week, week 1, and then since then he's just gotten worse and worse. So keep an eye. Don't start him, but Jaquez Rodgers, a guy that maybe you could run for the playoffs. As far as wideouts go, what about Deshaun Jackson of Tampa Bay? Well, Atlanta allows the 6th fewest points to wideouts. Now, as expected, Mike Evans came back last week, and Jackson slipped in terms of his catches and his targets, back to kind of his normal production. Now, he did have a touchdown that kind of saved his day. With Mike Evans being back and the matchup that he has, Deshaun Jackson's a guy that you're going to want to sit unless you have no other options out there. He's what I would call a wide receiver 4 this week. Now, Mike Evans is Mike Evans. Not a great matchup for him, but he's a must-start just because the type of talent that he is, so start Mike Evans. Julio Jones, got to start him. This is a no-brainer. Plays Tampa Bay, gives up the most points to wideout, so you got to start Julio Jones in this one. What about Sanu in this game? Well, he's got touchdowns 3 of the last 4 games. This is a great matchup for him. So he doesn't put up a lot of catches, doesn't put up a lot of yards because of the matchup and the fact that he's had TDs 3 of the last 4 games. I would say that he's the guy that you could start as about a wide receiver 3 to 4 play. As far as tight ends go in this game, you look at Hooper. Tampa Bay shuts down tight ends. Their linebackers are very good in coverage, and so I would sit Hooper this week. As far as Howard and Brate go, the Tampa Bay tight ends, it looks like there's kind of a changing of the guard. They drafted Howard to be that number 1 guy. He's very talented coming out of college. They talk, this guy's got all the skills. He's got great hands, great in the passing game. And what we're beginning to see is that little shift the last 3 to 4 games. In fact, since Winston's been out and Ryan Fitzpatrick's taken over, Brate has really taken a step back. He was very consistent tight end there for a while. But if you look at the last 3 weeks, Brate's only had 1 catch per week. And then if you look at Howard, He's had 3 TDs in the last 4 weeks. He's had an increase in targets and catches. So we're seeing that kind of change in the guard. Brait is not as valuable as once was. Howard's stock is rising. But here's the thing, it hasn't happened enough where I'd feel comfortable with Howard. So I wouldn't start Brait this week, and I'd probably stay away from Howard until you see enough there where you can trust him. As far as kickers go, I would sit Murray. I would start Bryant. Bryant should have a great play this week. I would sit Tampa Bay's defense and start Atlanta's defense. Browns versus the Bengals. Let's look at quarterback. Let's look at Kaiser. Well, Deshaun Kaiser's played better lately. That doesn't say a whole lot. You really can't play any worse than he did early in the year. Now, he did get Corey Coleman back this week. That helps a little bit. But I would not even consider starting Kaiser. Bengals give up the 8th fewest points to quarterback, and Kaiser has simply been bad. Don't start him. Stay away from him. What about Andy Dalton this week? Well, if you look at since week 2, from that point forward, Andy Dalton has played very well. In fact, during that time, after week 2, he's got 16 touchdown passes to only 4 interceptions. Last week, he had 3 touchdown passes to Denver. Now he plays the Browns, who give up the 15th most points to quarterbacks. Andy Dalton's a good start this week if you need to fill in. Most likely, for a lot of you out there, Andy Dalton's not your number 1 guy, but if you have a bye or if your quarterback has a bad matchup, Andy Dalton, you actually could plug him in this week and he'd be a good start for you. As far as running backs go, Mixon. Well, he's playing the Bears. The Bears allow the 7th fewest points to running backs, and Mixon right now, his yards per carry in the year are 2.9. They cannot run the ball there. The Bengals cannot do it at all. I would sit him. He's really what we call touchdown dependent. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to do anything for you. He's only got 3 on the year, so I would sit Mixon. Isaiah Crowell of the Browns. Now, he played really good. He had 2 weeks where Isaiah Crowell looked explosive. He's getting involved in the passing game. We saw an increase in his yards per carry. He was getting more involved, like I said, in the passing game. And then last week, he ran into the Jags defense. So he didn't do well last week, but no worries. A lot of people, when they play the Jags defense, get shut down. He's going to rebound this week against the Bengals, who give the 12th most points to running back. So you could start Isaiah Crowell. Then you have Duke Johnson. Well, Duke Johnson is a great PPR guy. He's worth a start in PPR-only leagues. Right now, he's got 46 catches on the year. So Duke Johnson only in PPR leagues. As far as the wideouts go in this game, you got Corey Coleman. Corey Coleman's a former first-round pick. He's got a lot of talent. He's very similar in his style and his physique to Antonio Brown and T.Y. Hilton in terms of how he plays and what he can do. Week 1 this year, he had 5 catches, 53 yards, and a TD before injuring his wrist. Then he came back last week and had 6 catches for 80 yards. So that was a great number right there. So he's a guy that you certainly consider playing. I would say he's a wide receiver 3. He plays the Bengals, who are tough. They have 5th fewest points to wideouts. But really, at this point, he's the best weapon they have out there. So I would roll out Corey Coleman as wide receiver 3. Sit all of the Browns wideouts. What about Cincinnati wideouts? Well, A.J. Green, you got to start him. Now, he's a tough matchup. Last week, he played Denver. He had 4 catches, 50 yards, and a TD. Not a great week. But, you know, that's what happens when you're the number 1 guy. He's the number 1 option in the red zone. And that's what happens with players like him. He's able to salvage his day with a touchdown. He's far too talented to sit even in a tough matchup, because when you do, you miss out on at least decent numbers. I would sit LaFell and Erickson in this game. As far as tight ends go, the Browns give up the 2nd most points to tight ends. The Browns do. So I would actually start Tyler Kroft. He's looked good at different times this year. I think he's filled in admirably for Tyler Eifert. So Tyler Kroft is a tight end you should start in this game. I would sit David Njoku or any other tight ends. As far as kickers, I would sit both kickers. As far as defenses, start the Bengals defense in this one. Definitely start them and sit the Browns defense. The Titans versus the Colts. Let's look at Jacoby Brissett. He's playing better and better. I got to give him credit. He's really settled into that role well. Now Andrew Luck's out for the year. He's looking more and more comfortable. He's had 6 TD passes and only 2 interceptions the last 3 weeks. Now he's playing the Titans at home, who give the 8th most points to quarterbacks. So he's a fair play if you need a fill-in. Not a great play, but something that you could certainly go with. As far as Marcus Mariota, last week we really wanted against somebody who said stay away from this guy. He's playing the Colts now. They give the 6th most points to quarterbacks. So Marcus Mariota has struggled all year. Now last week he kind of salvaged his game. He had a rushing touchdown. He was able to throw for 1. But as we predicted, he really struggled. He threw 4 picks against a tough Steelers defense. So could you start Marcus Mariota? Well, I think he's going to do a lot better this week against the Colts defense that's porous. So I think that Marcus is a guy that you could trust this week and this week only. As far as running backs go, Mack. You look at Marlon Mack. Now, he showed flashes of talents and potential, but until his carries and involvement in that offense increase, he's not worth taking a chance on at this point. The only thing I would even consider doing would be picking him up on a dynasty league and stash him as a bench maybe for next year to see how he does. Frank Gore, I love this guy. Great running back. He's 34 years old. He's well past his prime. I hope he retires after this year just because he's such a good back. I hate to see him tarnish his career. He's really struggling. He hasn't had a touchdown since week 3, and he's only broke over 57 yards once this year. Now he's playing the Titans, who allow the 12th fewest points to running backs. So the Titans are actually tough against running backs. He is the starter there, so I guess you would say that Gore would fall into what I would say a running back 3-4 category. He's got a medium floor with a very low ceiling. Let's look at the running backs for the Titans. Let's look at Henry. Well, they play the Colts. Derrick Henry plays the Colts, who allow the 8th most points to running backs. Earlier this year when he faced the Colts, he had 19 carries, 131 yards, and a TD. I would start Derrick Henry in this game. In fact, if you compare him to DeMarco Murray, Henry has actually looked the best. His yards have carried been better. He's looked stronger, more explosive. He's been the better back, and I'm not really sure why the Titans won't give him the ball more. Can't really make sense of that. He is the better back, and I trust him this week to start him. If you look at DeMarco Murray, he's battling right now. Age and injuries are the two things. His yards per carry are down, but he's still the goal line back there. 2 games ago, he had 3 touchdowns, and he's highly or extremely involved in the passing game. So for that reason, he's a guy that you could also start. And I would say the downside of that is that they steal carries from one another. I like Henry in this matchup, and I like DeMarco Murray simply because he is the goal line guy, and they use him in the passing game. So I would say that both of those guys fall into your running back probably 2 to 3 category there. Bubbles. A lot of that, once again, depends upon your league size, availability, who's out there, scoring, all those sort of things that I can't take into account. But I'd be happy to answer those questions on the bottom of the video specifically for you. As far as wideouts go, Rashard Matthews plays the Colts to give the 6th most points to wideouts. I would start him as a wide receiver 3. Now, if you look at Rashard Matthews, he had a big game against Pittsburgh. One that was on kind of a blown coverage where he was able to have a long touchdown. After that, they kind of kept him bottled up. One concern I have with Matthews this year is his targets have been low. In fact, he's only had one time where he's had more targets than 8 per game. And so he's a guy out there that, because of the matchup this week, he's a guy that you could play, but I'm not huge on him. Then you look at Davis. The rookie Davis got a lot of talent. Now he's had higher targets the last 3 games. The targets have been 5, 7, and 10, so getting him fairly involved. But he hasn't had a lot of high yards at this point, and so I would say he's a real deep flyer as a wide receiver 4 at best. I would sit Decker. Let's look at the Titans right now. The Titans give up the 4th most points to wideouts. So do you start T.Y. Hilton? Now, this is one that I'm wrestling with because I have a keeper league. Right now, I'm tied for first place in my division. I need to win, and I have T.Y. Hilton. He has been all or nothing this year. He's feast or famine. The problem with it is he's got a great matchup playing the Titans, who give the 4th most points to wide receivers, and T.Y. Hilton is far too good to sit, and so I need to start him, and I would encourage you to do the same. Consider him a wide receiver 2. I would sit Moncrief. He's got 4 catches total over the last 4 games. Chester Rogers is a guy that's getting more involved, but you can't trust him yet. He's a guy you should definitely keep your eye on and watch him. As far as the tight ends go, you need to start Delanie Walker. Now, he's got a tough matchup. Last week, he played Pittsburgh, who was really good against tight ends. Yet in that tough matchup, he still had 6 catches for 92 yards. Now, this week, he has a good matchup against a defense that allows the 15th most points to tight ends. Start Delanie Walker and start Jack Doyle. If you look at weeks 6 through 9, he was very good. And then he had one bad game, but he should rebound this week because he's Brissett's favorite target at this point. So Jack Doyle is a good start. Start both kickers. Both kickers are good starts in this game, and I would sit both defenses. The Bills versus the Chiefs. Well, Tyrod Taylor, the Nate Peterman thing did not work out for the coach there. Ouch, I don't know what to say. 5 picks in 1 half. The coach would be insane to start him, meaning this is Tyrod Taylor's team again. So could you start Tyrod Taylor? He plays Kansas City, who gives up the 14th most points to quarterbacks. Now, if you look at Tyrod Taylor, he's been really good in games this year during garbage time where they've been down, they've had to throw the ball, teams are in prevent defense, things like that. He's put up some big numbers. He's unpredictable, Tyrod Taylor, so what do I take from that? You're in weeks 12 or 13, you need to win, right? A lot of you are trying to make the playoffs, and he's got it's very unpredictable. He's got a high water mark of about 30 points one game. There's a low water mark of 2.79 points one game, so who knows what you're going to get with him. So the question mark is, can you trust him? Well, things that might complicate it for him, it sounds like Calvin Benjamin and Jordan Matthews might miss the game. In fact, we know for sure that Calvin Benjamin will be out, and so could you start Tyrod Taylor? I'd say start him if you need to, but hold your breath. He's just so unpredictable. I personally don't like to trust him. I'd rather go somewhere else. Alex Smith in the game. Plays Buffalo, gives up the 6th fewest points to quarterbacks. If you look at Alex Smith's last 3 games, he's had 3 TDs to 3 interceptions. So it looks like he's returned to what we say is more of a plug and play based on matchup. Alex Smith has been known to be kind of a game manager, kind of play conservative, don't turn the ball over a lot. Well, this year he was hot, they were on fire, but that whole team has really cooled down. And one of those guys that have cooled down is Alex Smith. So I would say probably want to look elsewhere, especially against the Bills, who are good against the pass. As far as running backs in this game go, you got Hunt. You need to start Hunt. Now, he's not the same back he was the first 5 weeks. The guy was lights out. There's a conversation with him in the MVP. Certainly rookie of the year. That's gone at that point. But he's still a very solid running back 1. He's a lead back with no competition. Now he plays the Bills, who allow the 2nd most points to running back, so you need to start Hunt. Sid West has no value. And LaShawn McCoy in this game, he's a running back 1. Even in tough matchups, and LaShawn McCoy is the guy that you need to start. Last week he rebounded with 13 carries, 114 yards. Plus he's a lot in the passing game, so this always keeps him involved. You need to always have him in your lineup. He's matchup proof. Not saying you want to have a bad week, but he's the type of guy that no matter what the matchup is, you need to start him. Wideouts go. Well, the Bills give the 12th most points to wideouts. Let's look at Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill in the year has been good, but he hasn't been great. Concern I have for Tyreek Hill, he's really the #1 wideout. And if you look at a wide receiver 1, which is what he falls in that category, his targets have been very low. Therefore, that keeps his production and reliability low. So he falls into what I would say is a wide receiver 2 that you need to start. I would sit all other Kansas City wideouts. Take a look at this game here. I mentioned that Benjamin's going to be out. So that leaves really the best wide receiver, the most productive one recently is Zay Jones, the rookie. He's really become their best option the last couple of weeks. He's had 6 catches, 53 yards in a TD, and then he followed it up with 4 catches and 68 yards. So he's really the best wide out there. But if you take a look at all those, Jones, Thompson will be in that game, maybe Jordan Matthews possibly. None of those guys are trustworthy. I wouldn't start any one of those unless you're very, very desperate. And then I'd go Zane Jones. As far as tight ends go, you look at Clay came back. He had a hot start, but since then he's slowed down. Now you add O'Leary into that mix. O'Leary's been somewhat effective at tight end. And so neither one of those guys can be trusted at this point. I would say Clay has some value as a low-end tight end. If you have other options, I'll look elsewhere. Travis Kelce, you need to start him. Him and Gronk are the best 2 tight ends in the league right now, so you just start Travis Kelce, and you'll be good. Both kickers are good starts in this game, Buckner and Steven Hauschka. As far as defenses go, I would sit the Bills. They've averaged, listen to this, last 3 games, they've averaged minus 1.67 points in Yahoo standard scoring. So sit the Bills, sit Kansas City. The Dolphins versus the Patriots. Okay, let's take a look at right now the Dolphins quarterback. Is it going to be Jay Cutler or Moore? Well, right now New England gives up the 2nd most points to quarterbacks. So this looks like a great matchup for the Miami quarterbacks, right? New England, 2nd most points allowed to quarterbacks. I think you need to be careful here. New England's played a lot better lately on defense. I think they've figured some things out. You look at the first 6 weeks of the season, their defense allowed 338 passing yards per game, right? So they're just getting lit up. The last 4 weeks, they're only allowing 225 yards passing per game. So sure enough, Bill Belichick took an opportunity. They made some adjustments like they always do. They figured it out on defense. They're playing a lot better. So even though it looked like it's a great matchup, I would say this maybe is a fair play this week for the Miami quarterbacks. Slightly above average at best, so don't get too excited by that. So I don't know who's going to play in this game. Let's look at Jay Cutler first of all. If he plays, should you start him? Well, Jay Cutler's had some very quarterback-friendly matchups this year that he's really played terrible. In fact, last week before he got injured, he had a great matchup against Tampa Bay, and before he got injured, he had thrown 3 interceptions. So there's just so many times that he's disappointed this year. I've come to the place where I honestly don't trust Jay at all. Of the 2 quarterbacks, I prefer Moore at this point. Matt Moore, honestly, he's played well in relief last year and this year. Now, some would point out that he was shut out by the Ravens, and he was. Matt Moore was shut out by the Ravens, but I think we need to caution, not overreact to that a little bit. The Ravens actually have 3 shutouts this year, and the Ravens are very good in pass defense, so I think we can kind of disregard that start a little bit. So if Jay Cutler plays in this game, I would not start him. I would be comfortable starting Matt Moore. I think he's a better play. I think he's more consistent right now. That's kind of where I'm at in this. And it sounds like Jay Cutler probably is not going to play. He's in concussion protocol at this point. Everything would seem to indicate that he's going to miss the game this weekend. So Tom Brady, do I need to tell you to start him? Obviously, many consider him the greatest of all time. And so start Tom Brady. Okay, there's nothing more to talk about there. As far as running backs go, I would start Dion Lewis. He's become the starter now. Last 2 weeks, Mike Gillislee has been deactivated in the game. And so that leaves Dion Lewis to become their starting running back. He's had TDs in back-to-back weeks. He's using the passing game. He's a guy that is safe for you. Now, I would say that he has a very high floor, but a very low ceiling. And here's why I'd say that. There's the Patriots love to spread the ball around. That's the one thing that they do there. It's really hard to game plan because they have so many weapons. This is a wonderful stat if you're thinking of football terms, but this is a dangerous stat in terms of fantasy football. 6 different Patriots have more than 400 yards from scrimmage. Well, that's wonderful, right? They have all these weapons there, but for us guys in fantasy football, try to pin down who you can trust. That makes it hard, and that's one of the reasons why Dion Lewis, even though he's a starting back there and he's a quality back, he's not going to have a high ceiling. White in this game, running back White for the Patriots. He had some PPR consideration, but he's still hit and miss there too. For the same reason I just mentioned, there's so many weapons. They spread the ball around to their tight ends, wide receivers, other backs. So personally, I would not be comfortable rolling out White. Rex Burkhead was beginning to get an increasingly bigger role. He was looking good, but he fumbled last week. If you know anything about Bill Belichick, he doesn't tolerate turnovers. So I need to watch and see Rex's role in this week's game to see what that's going to look like. Let's take a look at Drake and Williams in this game. New England gives the second most points to running backs, so that's a good play for both these guys. I prefer Drake as the lead now. The lead back last week, he struggled a lot, but the 2 games before that, he looked wonderful. His yards per carries were great. He was explosive. He ran hard. I think he's a better pure running back. Williams, on the other hand, I think Williams is more involved in the passing game. So I say Drake is kind of that guy in the running back 1-2 conversation. And then you look at Williams as somebody as a flex play or in PPR leagues. Let's look at wideouts here. New England gives up the 3rd most points to wideouts. So you look at Parker. Devontae Parker is a guy that was big on going into this year. He was injured early on, but something's going on there. You can't quite put a finger on it. He hasn't had a great game. We keep waiting for that blow-up or explosive game. He hasn't had it. The coach last week went out and said, and here's what the coach said, he doesn't have that same edge that he had coming out of training camp. And so right away there's some indication that what we are seeing statistically, the coach is already picking up on the field, maybe even in practice. And so right now that's just going to drop his value down. He does have a great matchup once again against New England, who gives up a lot of points to wide receivers. But his production, coach's comment made me think that you got to drop him down to wide receiver 3. You can't drop him beyond that simply because he does have talent and he does have a good matchup this week. Stills in this game. Stills I would consider wide receiver 3 this week, and here's why. First of all, I got to assume that New England's going to be up by a lot, and the Dolphins will have to throw the ball and play catch up. That's going to turn out to be a lot of garbage time statistics. If you look at Stills, he's got 4 TDs on the year. He had a huge game last week. He had 7 catches, 180 yards. He's had a major increase in targets. If you look at the first 5 games, Stills' targets were 4.8, and the last remaining games are 7.8. So he's an increase of 3 targets per game. So he's really getting involved there. I like Stills as wide receiver 3. And then Landry, you look at Jarvis Landry. He's got 6 TDs on the year. He has major PPR value. Now he's lower in standard leagues because yard totals have been down, but he's too talented to really sit at this point. He's really kind of their number 1 wideout at this point. As far as New England wideouts go, Hogan, it would be a good start if he played, but it sounds like he's going to miss the game again with an injury. We go to Danny Amendola. Can you trust him? Well, Danny Amendola's had 4 decent games this year. He's had 4 very unimpressive games. And the problem with Danny Amendola is the same thing I mentioned before, is they spread the ball around so much, it's really hard to pin down or trust his targets distribution. So you could play him, but I would say Danny Amendola falls into a wide receiver 4 or 5 against Miami, who allows the 12th fewest points to wide outs. Look at Cooks. Cooks blew up last week, 6 catches, 149 yards, and a TD. But if you look at Cooks on the year, he's been not great, but he's been good. So he's a wide receiver 2 this week. As far as tight ends go, you need to start Gronkowski every week. Doesn't matter who he plays. Then you look at Julius Thomas. Julius Thomas has 2 TDs on the year, but only once he's been over 80 yards. So he's a very low-end tight end play. I probably would look elsewhere. Start Gostkowski. I would sit Parquet. Start New England defense and sit the Miami defense. Panthers versus the Jets. Let's look at Josh McCown. He's playing the Panthers, who allow the 5th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, the last 2 weeks, McCown has been quiet. In fact, last time he played, he took a last-second touchdown. His time expired to Anderson to really salvage his day, so I would sit Josh. Cam Newton plays the Jets, who give the 13th most points to quarterbacks. Cam Newton's a decent play. Now, he's maintained his fantasy value this year with his legs. He's got 436 yards rushing and 4 TDs, so he's a guy playing. Another thing that's going to help him this week, he's going to get a huge boost. All reports are Greg Olsen's going to be back. His number 1 target, his tight end, all-pro tight ends coming back this week. As far as running backs go in this game, McCaffrey. Now he's playing the Jets, who allow the 12 fewest points to running backs. You look at McCaffrey, just hasn't been very good in the running game. In fact, none of the Panther running backs have really fared that well. Now, McCaffrey has seen an increase in yards per carry the last 2 games, and he does have 5 TDs on the year. In fact, those 5 TDs have come in the last 6 games. So what do you do with McCaffrey? Well, I would still say because they haven't run the ball really well, he's still getting a lot of carries per se. I really see him as a PPR only play. Some of you going to need to start him. I would say he sits as a wide receiver 3 in standard leagues. Jonathan Stewart. Jonathan Stewart has really had a fall off in terms of production this year. No, he has had double-digit carries every game except for one. So he's getting the carries, he's getting on the field. But right now he's struggling. His yards per carry for the year at 3.3, and that's been down each year last 4 years. It's dropped from 4.6 to 4.1, down to 3.8, down to 3.3. He's a guy that's really struggling out there. Now, there's a little bit of hope for Stewart. He's historically started slow in years and gotten stronger as the year went on. In fact, last game he had 17 carries for 110 yards. So he could be a running back 3-4. But with McCaffrey, his age, the slow start he's had, I would probably say you should look elsewhere. Now let's take a look at the Panthers. Panther gives up the 3rd fewest points to running backs. Now Matt Forte, reports are his knee is swollen. Sounds like he's going to miss time. In fact, he could be year ending. So that puts Powell actually in a good position. One of the things that hurt Forte and Powell is they would split carries and targets and bring down each other's value. So with Forte out of the picture, that really brings Powell's value up. Another thing that helps Powell is he's extremely used in the passing game. The problem with this week's matchup is the Panthers are very stingy on defense. So I'd say Paul falls into a running back 3-4 play this week. As far as wideouts go, the New York Jets give up the 8th most points to wideouts, so I would start Devin Funchess as the number 1 wideout ever since they traded away Calvin Benjamin. He's looked really good. In fact, I would say Devin's actually looked better than Benjamin at this point. Here's the 2 lines, the 2 games that he's been the number 1 guy for them. He had 5 catches, 86 yards, and then last game he had 5 catches, 92 yards, and 2 TDs, so he's a guy that you got to play. Another guy I would play in there is Robbie Anderson. He's had 4 TDs. He's had TDs 4 weeks in a row, and he's what I would say is a wide receiver 3, trending towards a wide receiver 2 as he continues getting more and more comfortable as the number 1 wide receiver there. I would sit Curse in this game. As far as tight ends go, Carolina gives with the 6th fewest points to tight ends. So let's look at Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Well, he's been a really reliable tight end this year. He's got 3 TDs on the year, but he doesn't have huge yardage totals, and he has a tough matchup. So I'd say he's a tight end about 10 to 12 range. I would sit at Dixon, as like I said, sounds like Greg Olsen will be back, and if he is back, he's a guy that you need to start this week. As far as kickers go, you can start both kickers in this game. They would be good plays. As far as defense, start the Panthers. The one thing I would say, they're very much like the Minnesota Vikings this year. The Panthers are playing great defense, but it hasn't always equated to good fantasy numbers. So I would start them, but lower your expectation in terms of your fantasy numbers. Sit the New York Jets. If you have to start them, they could be a low ND at this point. Let's look at the Bears versus the Eagles. Let's look at Mitch Trubisky. Starting to play better. Need to sit him. Doesn't matter. He's only had 4 touchdown passes in 6 games. He's still a rookie. And his best receiver is Iman, who's only been there for a few weeks. Now he plays Philadelphia's defense that's been getting better and better. In fact, the last 4 weeks, that defense is really starting to hit on all cylinders. So I would sit Trubinsky. Start Carson Wentz. This guy has been unbelievable. There's a lot of conversation about him being considered for the MVP at this point. The one thing that's been hurting Carson Wentz the last 2 weeks is they've been blowing teams out so badly they didn't need to throw the ball in the second half. But you need to start him. It doesn't matter if Chicago's good against the pass. Carson Wentz, a guy that you start. Right now, Carson Wentz for the year has 25 touchdown passes to only 4 interceptions. Not to mention, he's got good legs. He runs the ball well, so I get additional numbers that way. Start Carson Wentz. As far as running backs go, let's look at Jordan Howard in this game. Well, a stud running back faces Philadelphia, who gives up the 5th fewest points to running backs. So Philadelphia gives up the 5th fewest points to running backs. But Jordan Howard's really too good to sit at this point. He's got 5 TDs on the year, 4 times over 100 yards, and he's on pace 1,346 yards. It doesn't matter that other teams have stacked the box against him. It doesn't matter that teams are focusing on him. He's still getting his yards. His yards per carry at 4.4 on the year. He's really good. You got to play him. Tariq Cohen, he's trending upward. He's looking better, but not enough so that you can trust him this week. So sit Cohen. Let's look at Philadelphia's running back situation. Let's look at Clement, Blunt, and Smallwood. Well, Blunt has looked good last couple weeks, but I think there's a couple reasons why there. One, there's been blowouts. That's allowed Clement to get a lot of carries late in the game. And another reason why is J.I.J. is still learning that offense. But as J.I.J. gets more and more comfortable, and we assume that not every game is going to be a blowout, we're going to see a diminished role for Clement. Now, I think he's got a lot of potential there. I think he's got some talent, but he's still a rookie, and he sits on the depth chart about the third back below Blunt and below J.I.J. So I would probably shy away. Blunt, because a guy that you can trust him now. They give him a lot of carries. They said they're going to keep him involved in the offense, and they did last game, but I think a lot of that has to do with J.I.J. still learning the offense. In fact, once again, that I mentioned, it is a blowout, but he's going to lose more and more carries to J.I.J. In fact, if you look at J.I.J. has been crazy good since he's been there. That really lessens Blunt's value. In fact, J.I.J., since he's been there, in 2 games, he's averaging 11.2 yards per carry. Obviously, he's not going to keep that up, but this guy's been explosive, and so I think I would predict this is going to be the first game that AJ is going to get double-digit carries. That's going to happen this weekend. So I would stay away from Clement and Blunt. The only one that I feel comfortable trusting a lot at this point would be AJ. As far as the wideouts go, Dontrell Inman, he's the #1 wideout. He holds a wide receiver 3-4 value for Chicago. He's played decent there in 2 games, just starting to get timing down with Mitch Trubinsky. He's had 9 catches, 131 yards in 2 games. I think this week there's going to be a lot of garbage time stats. I'm sure that Philadelphia is going to crush the Bears. They're going to get ahead by a lot of points. Mitch is going to have to throw the ball. Yeah, he might get picked off, might be ugly, but that might equate to some garbage time stats for Inman at this point. I would sit all other Bear wideouts. As far as wideouts for Philadelphia, Alshon Jeffries, you need to start him. He's had 4 TDs last 3 weeks. He's also had a slight increase in his targets the last 5 games. And it would appear that he's become Wentz's favorite target in the red zone. I would sit Aguilar and Smith. I know we advised that last week. That was a good play. Hopefully you listen to our advice. Zach Ertz. Before he got injured, he had 6 TDs in 6 games. Now he's a must start. Now he does play Chicago, who's good against tight ends, but still Zach Ertz is too talented. He's a top 5 tight end. You need to play him even in a tough matchup. Then look at the tight end for Chicago Bears, Adam Shaheen. Now, the rookie has looked good last 2 games. He's filling for Zach Miller, who's got injured. He's out for the year. In 2 games, he had 6 catches for 80 yards, and he's had 1 TD during that time. Now he plays Philadelphia, gives the 10th most points to tight ends, and really, Adam has kind of picked up where Zach Miller left off. They love to use tight ends in that offense, especially rookie quarterbacks often will check it down to the tight end. So he's kind of a sneaky player there, but if you really want to stretch, or if you're in a daily fantasy league, he's a guy that you get for very cheap if you're looking at saving some money, and he might be decent for you there. As far as kickers go, Jake Elliott killed me last week. If he had played, I would have won the game. I ended up losing by a point because he got a concussion, I guess, and missed the rest of the game. And so what do you do with him? Well, watch the injury reports. I would think that he's going to be back and he's going to play, but we don't know. If he plays, start him. If he doesn't, you need to find somebody. That's simple enough. Sit Santo. They signed a kicker for Chicago after the last game, but I would sit him. And I would sit the Bears defense, but I would start Philadelphia's defense in this game. 49ers versus the Seahawks. Jimmy Garoppolo sounds like he's going to get the start this week. Now, I know Seattle's without Cam and Sherman, and they're vulnerable in the past now, but I would not play Jimmy this week. Now, he might become the franchise quarterback there, but this time of the year, weeks 12 and 13, where you need a win, you need to have good numbers out there, you need to wait and see how he does, how he picks up the offense. The other thing I want to caution you is that Jimmy Garoppolo has looked good in the NFL, but last time he played for New England, who had a lot of weapons. Now his best weapon is Goodwin. Just not the same comparison. So don't start Jimmy. I know it might seem like fun and exciting to do that, but don't take that chance. Russell Wilson, you need to start him. He's great. Plays San Francisco, gives the 4th most points to quarterbacks. Right now, Seattle has no running game, so their offense runs through the legs and arms of Russell Wilson. He's a great pick. As far as running backs go, do not start any Seattle wideout or running backs. The Seattle running backs are horrible. Now, Seattle gives the 4th fewest points to running backs, but I think you need to start Carlos Hyde anyways, just because he's a lead back. He's going to get carries. He's going to get touches. And for a lot of you, that warrants running back 2 consideration. You got to play him. Sit Matt Breida at this point. Now, San Francisco gives the 13th most points to wideouts. You need to start Baldwin, but I would still sit Lockett and Richardson, even though they seem to have a good matchup. They've just been so unreliable at this point. Now, occasionally they'll have a big game, but it's hard to trust from week to week. They might go out, and we've seen it where they've gone out and had 100 yards on 5 catches, and then the next 3 weeks combined, they might have a total of 2 to 3 more catches. So they're just so unpredictable in that I rather look elsewhere. I'd sit all San Francisco wideouts. Now, we know Seattle's vulnerable to wideouts, but it's Jimmy's first start. And let's be honest, none of these guys, even Goodwin, is a great wideout to begin with. If you have to grab a guy off that roster to start, it would be Goodwin, and he sits at about a wide receiver 3 to 4. I'd say closer to wide receiver 4. As far as tight ends go, sit Kittle, start Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's got 7 TDs on the year. I would start Walsh. I would sit Gould. I would sit San Francisco. You could start Seattle's defense, but the injuries that they've had, and the fact that Jimmy's now starting for San Francisco, and this is not some of the other quarterbacks that they had, it would lower your expectations if you start Seattle. Don't expect them to have a big Legion of Boom day there. Raiders versus the Broncos. Paxton Lynch is getting his first start. It was just announced today. They got a new offensive coordinator. That team is a mess. I'm excited to see what this kid can do, but you can't trust him. You need to see what he's going to do. New offensive coordinator, his first start. Don't start him, obviously. Derek Carr, now he's playing Denver. Now, Denver's defense is slipping. They give up the 17th most points to quarterbacks. Derek Carr's an adequate play, not great. Now, the talented young quarterback, and I like Derek Carr, he's kind of taking a step back this year. So he's a guy that you're going to play, but don't get as excited as maybe you were at the beginning of the season for Derek Carr. As far as running backs in this game go, now Oakland gives up the 5th most points to running backs. So you should be excited by this, right? For the Denver running backs? Well, here's the problem. There's a 3-headed monster there. This is truly your running back by committee. You've got Booker, Anderson, and Charles. And it's really hard to nail that down. Take, for example, last week, Booker looked like he was a lead back, but yet Anderson had a touchdown. Yet the week before that, Charles appeared like he was going to be the guy. And so they split. In fact, one week, I think their carries were 8, 8, and 10 between the three of them. They're almost divided right down into thirds. So if I had to pick a guy there to start, it would be Booker at this point. He seems to be the guy that's probably trending upward the most. He's also the youngest running back in of that three. Let's look at Marshawn Lynch. Well, the last 4 weeks, Marshawn Lynch yards per carry up, but now he's playing Denver, who's tough against the run. So here's what I would expect for Marshawn Lynch this week. 15 carries, 15 yards, somewhere in that range. He's really touchdown dependent. If he doesn't score a TD, he really doesn't have any value to it. He's not used in the passing game. As far as Richard and Washington go, they're so similar. In fact, they both are almost the exact same height and weight. And they're similar in as far as their skill set goes. Because of that, they steal carries from one another and they steal targets from one another. And so until one of them goes out or one of them's taken out of the picture, I wouldn't trust either one of those guys. As far as wideouts go, decent matchup. Oakland gives up the 14th most points to wideouts. Now, Emmanuel Sanders has struggled. I would imagine at this point, Paxton Lynch can only help both those wideouts there. So I would play Emmanuel Sanders a wide receiver 3, and then Demaryius Thomas, you need to start him. He's at TD 3 weeks in a row. He's a wide receiver 2 this week. As far as tight ends go, Denver gives up the 3rd most points to tight ends. So Cook is a top 10 start this week. In fact, you look at the last 4 weeks, Cook has really gotten some chemistry with Carr. There's looked good. Plays the defense, gives up a lot of yards and a lot of points to tight ends. Cook is good. I would sit all Denver tight ends. I would start both kickers in this contest, and I would sit the Raiders. And it's hard to say this, but I would sit Denver's defense this week until they start to turn it around. That team is really, the wheels are starting to come off that organization. The Saints and the Rams. Let's look at Jared Goff right now. Should you start him? Well, his performances have run in line with the defensive rankings that he's played. Whenever he's played teams that are terrible against the pass, he's had good games. And when he's played defenses that are good against the pass, he's struggled. He's been very consistent like that. So now he plays New Orleans, who gives up the 15th fewest points to quarterbacks. Now, I think that if you take a look at that, they can be exposed. I think he's able to maybe throw the ball and get some yards. I think he's going to do a lot better than he did against the Vikings. But don't expect him to rebound to some of the games he had before. He was hitting 300 yards and 3 TDs. I think Goff would sit maybe this week at 225 yards and 2 touchdowns. He'll recover, certainly. One of the concerns I have for Goff going into this week, his favorite target, Robert Woods, is going to be out with a shoulder injury. And so that's another concern that I have there that really lowers Goff's value. Drew Brees. Drew Brees is a future Hall of Famer, and he showed last week that he still has it. Now, this team is on an 8-game winning streak, and they did it based on running the ball very well and playing defense. That's how they got 8 consecutive wins. Last week he had a big week, but they were playing for fun. They were down by 15 points late in the game and had to throw. Now he plays the Rams, who gave up the 7th fewest points to quarterbacks. So Brees, he's a must-play. He's a Hall of Famer, but don't expect his 385 yards that he had last week. He's another guy that I would say maybe 225, 250 yards, 1 to 2 TD passes is about what you could expect. As far as running backs go in this game, you need to start all 3. Kamara, Ingram, and Gurley are all great plays. You look at right now, the Rams are getting the sixth most points to running back, so Kamara and Ingram are a great play. In fact, they are the best running back tandem in the NFL right now, hands down. They're running phenomenally. And then Todd Gurley, you need to play him. He's got 11 TDs on the year, so he's a must start. As far as wideouts in this game, start Michael Thompson. Now he's picked up his stats the last few weeks. Now he plays the Rams, will get the 10th fewest points to wideouts, but he's still a wide receiver 2, 1 to 2 in that area, probably more closer to a wide receiver 2 this week. Ted Ginn Jr. He's looked good. He's had a good year. In fact, last week he had a great week. Now, part of his statistics were because they were playing from behind, had to throw a ton. Don't expect that. Ted Ginn Jr., like the guy, like his role in the offense. Willie Snead is a non-factor. A lot of people thought he'd be huge this year. He wasn't. But because of who they're playing, I would say that Ted Ginn falls back down to a wide receiver 4 to 5 this week. We talked about Woods being out, so obviously not going to play him. Woods being out gives a bump to both Watkins and Cooper Kupp. Now they play New Orleans. It gives up the 8th fewest points to wideout. So this is not a great matchup for these guys this week. I would say that the wide receiver that benefits the most from this is Cooper Kupp. He's going to have the most looks. And I think Cooper's going to have a decent play this week, especially in a PPR league. He's a slot receiver who gets a lot of catches. As far as tight ends go, I would sit all tight ends in this game. None of them look like they're good starts. I would start both kickers. Greg Zuerlein and Lutz are both great starts in this game. And I would start the Saints defense, but I would sit the Rams defense. Jaguars versus the Cardinals. Well, Blaine Gabbert, he is going to be playing again this week. You need to sit him because he's playing the Jaguars, and that defense is insane. Don't even consider it. The Jags are too good. Blake Bortles, I would sit him because Blake's not good, and the Jaguars want to win playing defense and running the ball. If you take away Blake's week 3, where he had this anomaly, he threw 4 TD passes, outside of that, he's averaged less than a touchdown pass per game. Sit him. Doesn't matter if the Cards give up a lot of points to quarterbacks. I would still sit him. You can't trust him. As far as running backs go, start Leonard Fournette. As far as Adrian Peterson go, we predicted this last week. We told everybody to stay away from him. He's been very predictable. He's played Cardinals 5 games. He's had 2 really good games and 3 flops. And all of those games, the 2 teams that he had great games were against teams that gave up a lot of points to running backs, so going into it. And then the 3 games that he struggles with against defense that were good against the run. So in conjunction, or I guess in relationship to the quality of the defense, can kind of determine where Adrian is right now. He's not the running back he was 5, 6, 7 years ago, where he could overcome even a great defense. He's just not that back anymore. Now he plays Jacksonville, who's at the 13th most points to running back. So that seemed to indicate, okay, Adrian's going to have a good matchup this week, right? We got to dig in a little bit deeper at Jacksonville there. If you take a look, at Jacksonville had 2 bad weeks versus the Jets, where they just went off for over 200 and some yards rushing. I think it was like 250 yards rushing. And then they had 1 game where they gave a lot of yards to Todd Gurley. If you take those 2 games away, the Jets have been great against the run. Adrian's in for another tough week. Sit him. I would say he's a running back 3. And the only reason why I even consider him a running back 3 is simply because at least he's the lead back there. He's probably closer to running back 4 this week. As far as wideouts go, the Jags allow the fewest points to wideouts. Now, Larry Fitzgerald's having a great year. He's on pace for 110 catches, 1,229 yards. So you can't sit him just for that reason. But you need to lower him to wide receiver 2 to 3 this week. Sit Brown, Nelson, and Brown. Now, if you look at the Cards give it the 10th most points to wideouts. So I would start Lee. I would sit the other guys. Dede Westbrook hasn't looked that good. You got some other guys there, Cole. But none of them have shown enough consistency to trust. As far as tight ends go, Mercedes Lewis is really touchdown dependent. I wouldn't start him. He's got 5 TDs on the year. I think it's 5 TDs, something like that. But beyond that, he doesn't contribute a lot in terms of catches or yardage. I would sit the Cardinals tight ends. As far as kickers go, start Lambeau, sit Dawson, start the Jags defense, obviously, and start Arizona's defense in this one. I think they have a good day. Packers versus the Steelers. Ben Roethlisberger. I need to start him. He's only really had 1 bad week, and that was against the Jaguars, where he threw 5 interceptions, but that was against the Jaguars, and they're very good. You take that out of there, and Ben's having a good year. In fact, last week he exploded for 4 TDs. We told you to keep him in your lineup. We told him he was going to recover. He had a good stretch of games coming up. We hope you listened to that advice. Brent Hundley. Now, he's playing Pittsburgh. He's at the 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks. It looked early on like Brent was maybe able to make that adjustment, but he's actually playing worse and worse. And I think defenses are starting to look at game film and kind of figure out where he's at. He's gotten progressively worse. Now he goes into Pittsburgh, and this could get ugly there with a very good Pittsburgh's defense. Sit Brent. As far as running backs go, Pittsburgh is at the 9th fewest points to running backs. This game, it could be a shutout, honestly. It could get ugly. I would sit Jamal Williams. He's averaging 3.2 yards per carry. Hundley cannot move the ball. There's nothing about this that is appealing to me. And Jamal Williams, once again, if you're very desperate and you need a running back, he's about a running back 4 right now. Start Le'Veon Bell. Don't need to tell you that. That's obviously a no-brainer. As far as wideouts go, you need to start Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster. They both have great matchups. The one thing I would say is Juju Smith-Schuster is on the injury report. Sounds like he's just a little banged up and he's going to play, but make sure to check that as it gets closer to the weekend. Let's take a look at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh gives up the third fewest points to wideouts. Well, sit Jordy Nelson. He had a major drop off. Ever since Aaron Rodgers got hurt, he has just dropped. His targets have dropped. His stats have dropped. Now, one guy that has maintained his value for Green Bay right now is Davante Adams. Davante Adams with Hundley at quarterback has done well. Last 3 games, he's got 20 catches, 269 yards, and a TD. So I know it's not a great matchup. I would sit Jordy Nelson, but I would actually start Davante Adams as about a wide receiver 2 in this one. As far as tight ends go, I would sit all tight ends. I would start kicker Boswell. I would sit Crosby, start Pittsburgh's defense, start Pittsburgh once again, and sit Green Bay. Texans versus the Ravens. Joe Flacco. Well, Houston gives up the most points to quarterbacks, but here's the one thing. Flacco has been bad all year. He's thrown less touchdowns per game than the games played. And so he's got a great matchup, but he's been brutal all year. So what wins out? The matchup, his terrible play. Well, I'd say if you're really desperate, Joe would be worth a desperate play. This will be Flacco's best statistical game, this game. He will have his best game. Now, what that actually looks like for him, it's hard to say. I would imagine it's going to be lower scoring just because the Ravens are playing better defensive ball right now. Joe Flacco, for me, still sits around the 20 range, if not even worse, probably closer to 25. Tom Savage plays the Ravens, will get the second fewest points to quarterback. Sit Savage. There's nothing there that you want to look at. As far as running backs go, the Ravens give up the 10th fewest points to running backs. So should you play Lamar Miller? Well, Lamar Miller is a running back 2 this week, in my belief. Now, Foreman's out, tore his Achilles, out for the year, and so that means all the carries, all the targets that were going to Foreman, a lot of them are going to go to Miller at this point. So he's going to get a lot of volume. That's great. Now, his production in terms of yards per carry may drop, but Lamar Miller's going to carry value because he's going to get the carries and the targets. Therefore, I'd say Lamar Miller's still our running back 2 this week. Look at Houston. Now, Houston gives up the fewest points to running backs. So let's look at Alec Collins. Now, he found pay dirt last week for the first time. He did catch 4 balls, which is huge. And his yards per carry in the year are 5.0, which are great. Alec Collins is a running back 3 to 4 just because the Ravens are really, really good against the run. I would sit Woodhead and Allen. Here's why. Woodhead came back last week and he had some catches. And then you've got Allen. The problem is that they're very similar and they steal carries from one another. They steal targets from one another. Neither one of them will get enough to carry value in that game. As far as wideouts go, the Ravens give up the second fewest points to wideouts, but you got to start Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is just too good to sit. I don't care who he's playing; he's a must start. Sit Fuller and Ellington. Now you look at the Texans. Now Texans give up the 5th most points to wideouts. So could you start Macklin or Wallace? Well, Wallace has had 2 TDs the last 2 weeks. He's kind of a sneaky play as a wide receiver 4 this week. And the same thing with Macklin. He would fall into maybe a wide receiver 3 play there. I would say that those guys have low ceilings though because Flacco is their quarterback. As far as tight ends go, CJ, since he's come back off injury reserve, really hasn't connected with Savage yet. I would sit him. Ben Watson's a fair play against the Ravens, who give up a decent amount of points to tight ends. As far as kickers go, start Tucker, sit Kai Farbarn, I think you say his name is, and then I would start Ravens defense. I would sit the Texans. So I think it's a long video. I actually wanted to give you guys more information, more details, but I didn't want the video to be 2 hours long. And so what I will do is if you have any questions, I'll dig in even deeper to whatever matchups you may have, questions, concerns. Let me know in the bottom of the video. Thanks for joining me tonight. God bless and take care.